Hello and welcome to Activating Magic. This is your host, Darla LeDoux, and I am here with the awesome, fabulous Kait LeDonne. Hi, Kait.
Hi, Darla. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you. So, just so folks have some background, I'll give your bio in a second, but Kait was my coach helping me with LinkedIn, and that is her expertise. And one of the things I found is she got me so quickly. And so I know she's magical. And so I'm excited to dive in today, Kait, about your magic. I hope people don't go look at what I'm posting on LinkedIn because I'm not totally following your guidelines yet. So look at what Kait is posting on LinkedIn. Okay, great. So, Kait LeDonne is a personal branding expert and award-winning brand strategist based in New York. She founded her first business, LeDonne Brands, in 2015 and developed one of the first online courses centered around LinkedIn, the Influence Academy, to teach executives how to position themselves as thought leaders in their respective spaces. To date, over 75 executives have completed the program. Kait has also authored the book, The Attraction Magnet: Seven Insider Secrets the Biggest Brands in the World Use to Attract Customers Who Can't Wait to Buy from Them. Kait speaks to audiences all over the world, keynoting, facilitating workshops, and participating in panel discussions on this topic. She's got a really cool free gift we'll tell you about that you're not going to want to miss. But really, what I love, Kait, is your authenticity. You know, one of the things that surprised me the most that I know you encourage all your people to do is tell stories on LinkedIn to really share the moments that people can connect to rather than, the notion that we have that we should be all polished and together and look professional on LinkedIn. So I really appreciate your vulnerability, your insight. I appreciate how you have supported me in my messaging. And I'm excited to hear a little about your magic. I think the first question I want to ask is, how did you even come to start your business back in 2015? What's the story behind that?
I would love to say that I had this really great drawn out business plan and all the things you think you should have when you start your business. Um, it's actually serendipitously a story that I see in so many of my clients, which is I was in corporate America. At the time, I was put into an interesting position, which was I was a very young manager. I
Mm,
think I was 24 when I first became a manager, and I was completely out of my depth. And this company I worked for was growing very quickly. We had been acquired by a private equity group and all of a sudden started snapping up companies left, right, and center. And it was my role as the singular head of marketing at the time to figure out how to envelop those brands into the brand that we had, and feeling completely out of depth and unresourced in doing so, I took to LinkedIn to find mentors and share my learning
mm,
lessons. And in spite of myself almost, what started to happen was people were identifying with my journey. I think a lot of people at the time, keep in mind this was around 2012, like
mm,
2013, could relate to who I was and what I was doing in that. Some of you will know this based on the age range of this audience, but I got recruited to corporate as you're a millennial who understands Facebook. Like that really was the ticket to entry in 2012 and
mm,
2013. It was such a time of corporations trying to figure out what to do with social media. And when I say social media, I predominantly mean Facebook. A lot of people are just like, I think we need to be on it, find a millennial. And so that was a lot of what I was displaying in my learning lessons and how I had to quickly mature into beyond that and really thinking about marketing strategically. And in doing all of that and sharing my lessons on the platform, I started unexplicable things started to happen to me. Like my local AOL office in Baltimore asked me to come host a session called Growing Your Brand on Social Media. The local Baltimore Business Journal asked me to come lead a session about growing your brand on social media. And I thought oh, they're going to talk to me all about how I did this for my company. And they're like, no, 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 no. We mean you. Like everybody has been following you in this community. We want you to
Yeah.
come and talk about how you did that for yourself. And it's one of those things that I think probably a lot of your audience can relate to, which is you can only connect the dots retrospectively.
Yes.
And I really saw that, oh, wow, okay, like that was the journey that I was on, but I couldn't have told you that. I thought I was on a different journey. And then people started asking me, you seem to have really cracked the LinkedIn thing. Can you help us? Um, and I started to say
Mm,
yes to that. And before I knew it, my fulfillment was really being generated outside of my corporate job.
mm,
And then I felt this like resounding sense of dread every time I pulled up to the office.
mm.
And that was the first, what I'll say, like whisper of my soul that was like, you're not meant to be here. And it
Now,
became very quickly physical.
mm, oh, wow. Now, were you getting paid for this outside of work or were you just doing it for fun?
I had menial payments
Okay.
from folks, which was encouraging the sense of, oh, if I just ask for money, people will pay, which is like one of the first hurdles. Um, but yes, I was getting a little bit, but in no way, shape, or form enough to really replace
Yeah.
the corporate salary at that point.
Got it. And you said it quickly became physical. And,
Yes.
I want to ask when you were helping people and you didn't necessarily set out for that. I love that you said, oh, this wasn't the path I thought I was on. And so you're being asked to help people with something that maybe you didn't design, right? Like I work with clients to help them design their business model and, okay, this is how clients flow through and here's my goal. And you didn't have that, yet somehow you were helping them. Like, how did you know how to help them? And where might that be a little bit of magic?
A great question. Truly, I looked at my own journey and I thought, what are the key principles that got me there? What is the thing that I feel like is systemizable and not specific to just me? And I am really not a left brain person. I'm all right, like all right side, meaning like
Yeah.
just creative. But it was a really good time to take stock of if I were going to try and duplicate this for someone else or train someone else, what would be the core thresholds they need to cross. And in that way, I'm really glad I had people asking me for the service before I ever thought to
Mm,
package it, because then I was building alongside with them and seeing how they responded versus putting things into a vacuum and
yes.
trying to sell it wholesale in that way where I lacked real-time feedback and results. And
Mhm.
since then, that's how I've launched every single one of my products or programs. I never
Mhm.
build it, then sell it. I always find the first one or two beta people, go through it with them at an extremely discounted price, see where things are going, and
Yes.
then I seek to package it.
Yes, same. So when you went to package it, I think of recognition magic, which is that connecting the dots, seeing the patterns. Would you say that was alive for you when you were kind of figuring out, okay, now what?
Yes, definitely. So much so. And I think I have a picture of this somewhere where I just had a giant white poster board and a bunch of sticky notes that look like this. And I just started
Yeah.
literally writing an idea down, sticking it, and then what took shape. I didn't come in saying, well, there's six core components. I just put them on there and then I started organizing them because I'm a visual thinker. And then all of a sudden, what started to happen was there's clearly six categories here. And then now that the six
Yes.
categories of things that go together, I can see sequentially
Mhm.
how that order of operations has to work. So, yes, recognition for the win all the way on that one. But again, it's so funny, Darla, and I know that you experience this all the time with people you work with. Like, I couldn't have told you that that's what I was doing at the time. I just knew I
Yeah.
had it inside of me and I needed to get it out. And then after a while of trying to figure out, should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? I was just like, nope, it's going to be magic marker, some sticky notes, a poster
Mhm.
board, and just dumping and then putting the pieces together like a puzzle. And that I think without that, like none of this would have
Yeah.
happened.
Wow. That's exactly how I developed my first program, and probably the second, maybe the third. And now I just use like colored markers and draw, but
Yes.
it started with sticky notes and organizing. And I used to host retreats where we would help people plan their retreats. And it was the same thing, right? Like, let's brain dump all the things people need and we'll sticky note it.
There's
So,
something very
mm,
real, at least in my experience, about the kinetic aspect of that. It
yes.
does feel, and again, sure, Trello is like a virtual orientation of that, but it was so much more doing it with your hands. There was that real
Mhm.
connectivity to, I am actually pouring this out of me
Mhm.
and organizing by touch that
Yeah.
as digital of a creature as I am, I still think that that's, where I default to.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned going into the office and feeling physically sick. And I immediately think sensation magic, which is, another one. And that's really where we're feeling in our body where the energy is. We're feeling in our body what's going on, maybe with our clients when we're in a committed container. So the physical touching can be a huge piece of it, and standing and moving. And, for me, when my sensation magic started really coming online, I couldn't sit at a desk. It was like my
Mm,
body just would not let me sit. I had to move. So I hear that and I connect that with what we were talking about before we started recording about the extra consciousness that you're experiencing in your body right now and how
yeah.
present that's making you. So, did you want to share anything about that?
I'll share like the whole, I think, conversation around sensation magic, which is number one. And then we'll bring it back into the consciousness that is growing inside me. I'm expecting. That's the cliff notes, but we'll get there. Ever since I was young, the mind body connection for me, and again, mindfulness wasn't even a word I had in vernacular at the time, so I couldn't have told you that's what this is. But as I look back at really key moments of my life, there is irrefutable times where my body was not just keeping the score, but like keeping the
Yeah.
score, but loudly flashing it in front of me. And that started when I was 14 and I was going through a really horrible time and I got Bell's palsy. My body was inflamed, my face was temporarily paralyzed. And ever since then, Darla, it's so crazy. Every big turning point in my life has been accompanied by some physical manifestation. And I used to lament it like, God, I hate
Yeah.
how, literally I wear my emotions or emotional state on my sleeve or in my skin. But it was down to, again, the second I started to feel that job was no longer right, I had terrible gut issues. I would come to the office and break out in hives. And I now see it as
Wow.
a gift. Yeah, it was wild. And I wasn't even particularly that quote unquote woo woo at the time. Like I'm totally in that vein now, but
Uh-huh.
I couldn't have told you that. But in a way, it was this really good gift because I was in such physical discomfort at all these times. I had to push myself out of the situation, and a lot of times it was like full sail, okay, something in your life, exit. And as soon as I did, it was like here today, gone tomorrow. And so I learned to really trust that and not try and quelch it, but pay attention to what circumstances were in my life. So hives and stomach aches preceded the leap from corporate. Bell's palsy was really tied towards a point where I was younger. And now I lean into those. And right now, as I'm expecting and birthing something quite different than a business, but an actual human, there have come these moments where you can either remember to pay attention to your breathing and your inhales and exhales and all the things that I try and do through meditation. But now it's so different because there is a consciousness inside of me kicking me. Um, and you can't control that. It's like it's there, and you're like, oh my God, there's something that's not me. That's somebody inside of me. And the best part about that, it's having the opposite effect that I felt on those other negative manifestations of physical things where it's become so grounding. Like every time that baby kicks, which is pretty frequently, I'm like, oh, right, it's only happening here now. And whatever was going on in my head, it immediately takes a back seat to the very odd sensation and like otherworldly sensation that's happening in my gut. And that's been really lovely in the sense of, I would say, the last 6 months at this point have felt like the most clear I've ever been in business and life. And there's, I think, this trope of like pregnancy brain, you feel foggy. I'm like, I feel like I'm on the razor edge of presence right now. And I think it's because my body is
Mm.
changing so rapidly. It's forcing me to just be with everything as it comes up. So, yes, it's so funny. I love that you have the language for this because I couldn't tell you how big sensation magic has been in my journey, both
Yeah.
good and bad. But the more I've tried to harness it, not fight it, you
Mm.
know, the more like everything else opens up. And it's just crazy how that
Yes.
works.
Yes. I'm going to ask in a minute about how it shows up with your clients. And you use the word otherworldly. And, for me, our magic is really source helping guide us to higher consciousness
Hmm.
and our clients. I see us as light bringers working to elevate the consciousness collectively. And you mentioned kind of having another consciousness there with you. And I'm just, curious what your experience of that is.
It's really interesting because I think your human tendency, and I can only say this from somebody, again, who's been on a mindfulness journey for the better part of a decade now, I feel the pull to want to own what's happening in my body, if that makes sense. Like
Mhm.
it's my child and my body and me all the way home. And when I set that very human urge aside and not make it about me, I remember like, and this is my belief, right? Everybody has their own belief systems that this is a soul who I'm kind of just ushering into this iteration of themselves in this world. And I think that's the other part where I become so clear is I try and take myself out of it. And if you look at all things of like, you know, underpinnings of religion and mindfulness, what is it if not an elimination of the ego? And so this other consciousness, as I lovingly refer to it, or this otherworldly thing, has been nothing to me other than a really stark reminder of I don't control anything. It's
Mhm.
as silly to say I control what's happening in my womb right now as it would be to say I created the backache inside of me. No, I'm experiencing this sensation
Mhm.
inside of me, and the more I take myself out of it, the more everything else flows. It's not so
Mhm.
personalized. And the hard thing about that with, you know, like gestation or whatever is it's so easy to personalize it because it's a happy thing. It's not a bad
Right.
thing. It's not like pain or chronic pain. It's a happy thing. But
And
I
it's
think
your
that's
body creating it.
yeah. But I think that's the ultimate like thing is in the most joyous and most agonizing of times how can you just experience it without centering yourself in it?
Yes.
And that's been really fun to go through with this particular joyous event. It's like, oh, right. Like, I'm just like quite literally a vessel. It's like such a good analogy to what you were talking about with working with clients. Like, it's
Yes.
like I am truly nothing, if anything, than a channel right now for this human to
I
enter the
love
world.
that. That's so amazing. I remember my mentor at one point saying repetitively, you come through your parents, but from God, through
Yeah.
your parents from God, right? And the level of freedom that gave me from the obligation of being my parents' property in some way. So
Yeah.
if all parents could think that way, imagine how free little humans would feel.
I really hope I can maintain that because I agree. I forget where I read it, but I think it might have been in a Glennon Doyle book, and I wasn't a parent, but I do think I don't agree with everything she says all the time, but she said something in one of her books that never left me, which is the day I became a great mother was the day I stopped being an obedient daughter. And I was like, oh
Ooh.
my gosh. And it was really that, right? I stopped viewing myself as property of something
Mm.
or a series of expectations of other people. And it was time for me to become empowered and say how this was going to go for my
Yeah.
family. And I never forget that quote, even though I was years away from even thinking about having children. I just found it to be so applicable to anything. Like the day I became a great insert something here is the day I stopped being an obedient daughter. And listen, I love my parents. I
Yeah.
have a great relationship with them, yada, yada, yada. But it really is hard to see outside the lens of expectations you put upon yourself as you inherit them from other people.
Yeah. Like, so I'm imagining you encounter clients wondering what their mother will think when they post something
Yeah.
personal on
Yeah.
social media. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, their mother might not be so equipped to be on social media, but yeah, their employer, their imaginary client, the imaginary ordaining body of expertise, the imaginary cultural body of young 20 somethings who know better
The
online, like
imaginary ordaining body of expertise. I love that.
that is one thing though I see all the time is like people think there is this credibility panel out there and you wait and you wait and then one day they ordain you and they're like, wow, the gates are open, here you are, you've done it, Darla, like you've put enough time, enough agony in, you've hit your critical 10,000 hours of whatever, and we now recognize you to be Oprah. And congratulations for that. And it's like, no, that's not at all how that works. You don't wait, and you don't fake it till you make it. You state it until you create it. And nobody knows that you're on that journey of expertise or that you are an expert if you're not doing those things. And I think
Yeah.
that that's one of the biggest things people get wrong about personal branding is they're waiting to get called to the dance instead of finding and forging their own path to it.
Mm, so true. Okay, so let's go back to your starting to get asked to speak and you're pulling together this content, created a course, and you're working with people on social media presence. At what point did you know it was personal branding or decide that that was the thing that matters?
I think I was paying attention far too much from the expectation of business that was right in front of me and other people who I thought knew better, people who had been in business for longer and said, look, there's this great opportunity right here with brands. There's all these old stodgy accounting and legal businesses, and what they really want is a fresh brand to attract millennials, and you're a millennial, and
Mm,
look how much money there is to be made. And again, in my gut, I could have said, well, that's not ultimately what I want to do, but it's really hard to turn
yeah.
away retainers that are, even back then in 2015, like $8,000 a month. I was like, great. Oh my God, amazing. I'm rich.
Mhm.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And what happened was I kind of knew I wanted to go into personal branding. And then I worked with two women from a corporate capacity who were starting a legal cannabis business, a medical cannabis
Mm,
business in the state of Maryland, because Maryland had just received legality for medical cannabis. And it was these two women who one was a former engineer and venture capitalist, and the other was a retired OBGYN. Both of
mm,
them were like suburban mothers of teens. And I think the venture capitalist, had just been asked to finance so many of these businesses. And she thought, I could probably just write the proposal myself for shits and giggles. Like, let's just see. I'm a venture capitalist. And they got the license and they got like the first pick at the license. And so what we had a query on was, well, how do we make something that's been so taboo for
mhm,
so long palatable to a market? And then we realized, like, what's the safest way to do that but suburban moms? Like, as soon as a suburban mom
mm,
says it's fine,
mhm,
it's fine. And so we centered their stories in the
mm,
brand, wrote a book, And within like 3 months of publishing the book, they were on the Today Show with Maria Shriver talking about
Mm.
the medical efficacy of cannabis as it came to certain conditions. And their like website broke because there was so much traffic inflowing from the entire country. And they started to get on the
Mm.
speaker circuit, and all of a sudden, the community acceptance really started to tip. And that was when it
Mm.
all really crystallized for me, is like,
Mm.
yes, the brand, but people will move so much faster. They will accept so much faster if there's a real human element to the brand. And so I just went full tilt into not the dispensary's branding, although I was always a part of that, but their branding. And then that's when it was like, okay, this is the magic. Like, I feel good about it. I know it.
Mm.
I see it. I see how it's impacting things. From here on out, I'm going to work with founders and experts and professionals on developing that brand, knowing that it
Mm.
moves so much faster and is felt so much more than a corporate brand.
Okay, so if we think about your magic and how it works, talk to me a little bit, whether it's you want to use them as an example and how you kind of saw like maybe recognition, sensation, how it felt in your body, how you knew you're welcome to use me if you want. I'm happy
Yeah.
to be talked about, or, just share a little bit about in the process of helping someone clarify their personal brand, how does your magic fire on their behalf?
It's a really, really good question. And it's so funny because I've taken the sourced quiz so many times. And like, depending almost like on the day, I'm like, I think it's a little more of this, or I think it's a little more of that. I
Yeah.
do think there's an inescapable version of the recognition, though, because it's almost like as soon as somebody tells me their story that got them to a certain point, I can organize the key aspects of it and the key aspects of them that creates a compelling brand, and pull that out of them and almost create a system for it in a way that they couldn't recognize it. And so it's like this identification and recognition of things, and really figuring out what that compelling aspect is. Now, I try and train people how to do this for themselves. And actually, this is not a plug, but a very nice segue into the free gift Darla and I are
Mm.
giving about the magnetic message formula. There are key components of every personal brand that are very present if you pay attention,
Mm.
and catalog them. But I think the rapid identification and cataloging and helping people do that outside of the blind spot that is living their first person life
Mm.
is probably the magic there.
Mm. Yes. I love that you brought in the blind spot because it really is, in the way that I talk about it, our magic is always there to guide us. And your client's magic is there too, but the blind spot gets in the way, right? Whatever we believe about our story or what we think we can say or can't say, or something we've said so much, we think it's boring. We can't hear the resonance that's coming through us. And so having that outside person who can put their magic to it is so helpful because we don't have the block for the other person.
Yeah, and I think that's actually where the biggest, paradigm shift of personal branding is the term personal branding sets us all up to fail,
Mm.
because the first and key word of it is personal. And so you are led to believe, well, I have to do this soul searching to identify my strengths and all
Yeah.
of my things and what makes me unique. And almost in the state of over self absorption, we
Mhm.
either miss the very things that are that,
Mhm.
or we put so much pressure on
Mhm.
ourselves, or we totally take ourselves out. And this is where like the biggest thing, imposter syndrome, impacts people's personal branding, is like,
Mhm.
well, I just am not compelling enough and I don't have enough experience, versus starting out here, who am I trying to serve? What are they going through? And then where can I find the intersections of those challenges in my life? It doesn't mean I have to climb Everest to get there. And trust me, I've worked with people who have climbed
Mhm.
Everest, and that's great. But it's almost, I would say, sometimes a bit of a hurdle, because when you get to that level, so many people can't relate to that. They don't want to understand
Mhm.
how you
Yeah.
climbed Everest. They want to understand how they can start to get outside and create a relationship with nature in a very busy world and society that
Mm.
prioritizes online
Yeah.
engagement. And so it's like you miss the magic of what your audience actually
Mm.
needs to hear by having this overinflation in all of your climactic moments and
Yeah.
over fixating on those. Life is not your climactic moments. That's like 10% of it. It's the 90% of it in between. And if you can identify the magic of that 90%, that's where real
Mm.
relatability and traction with your
Ooh.
audience happens.
Wait, say that again slower. That's
I know.
so
I'm like, I
good.
should have just, what did I just say there? I was like, I could, speaking of magic, I was like, I don't even know where that came from, but it's true. Um, no, it's if
It's
you,
so good. Life is not, I'll say it back. Life is not the climactic moments that make up the 10%, but it's really the 90%. That's like more of who you really are as a personal brand.
it
And we
is, and
do
it's
go to
more
the
of,
highlight reel, right?
yes. And the highlight reel, it's good in the context of putting the messy middle, the messy 90% into perspective. So you need that to anchor it. I'm not saying like
Mhm.
don't share those pinnacle moments, but people can't relate to the glory. They're going to relate to the story. And so you have to be able to pluck out of that 90 what the key tenets are. And I think that's just so much of life too, right? Like the average adult lifespan in the United States is 79 years. Over a course of 79 years, there's probably going to be 7 to 10 really impactful decisions or moments that
Mhm.
happen to you. And if you live your life waiting for the 7 to 10, your
Yeah.
life isn't going to be all that magical. If you learn to love the other
Mhm.
99% and figure out that, then you'll have a life well lived.
Over here we do a lot with energy and how you're showing up, right? And how you show up is how you show up is how you show up. And people will, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is, well, once my energy is all clear, then I'll show up. And it's like, yeah, but you're already emanating your essence now.
Yeah.
And so that really, to me, connects with that 90%. It's like, okay, you're already there. And
Yep.
yes, there's transformation. And yes, you're going to mess things up and you're going to learn and you're going to grow and you'll become more of who you are. But who you are is already there.
Yeah.
And
And
I
it's
think,
it's so sorry. I was just
yeah,
as you were saying
no,
that, I was
go.
like, there's this apt analogy that it's like if you wait till the clouds are parted and the sun is out, it's really hard to see your light emanate. But
Mm,
you always have,
yeah.
like in this analogy, a light coming out. Sometimes you see it most in the dark. And like
Mm,
the dark night of the soul is
yeah.
actually the time you really see
Yeah.
that shining. But we don't pay attention to it. We're so focused on how dark it is. It's like, well, I'm not paying attention to the path that's lit up in front of me. I'm just so focused
Yeah.
on the darkness, waiting for the sun to come.
Mm. And so I love that you said personal branding sets us up to fail because then we think we have to figure it out and then we
Mhm.
can be a little self-absorbed about it. And that's the second time I've heard you talk about like how self-focused we can be as humans.
Yeah,
And
and
so what, yeah,
I
advice
was
on
just
that.
it goes both ways though, right? I don't think people realize that the other side of the quarter of self-absorption is imposter syndrome. But it
Mm,
is inherently the same thing.
yeah.
It's an overfixation of self. It's an over to
Yeah.
bring this really full circle. It's an over insertion of ego. It's either an assessment that I don't have enough, which again is very I centered. And so
Mhm.
you take yourself out, or I have to overinflate who I am, put myself at the center of everything, and then you come off like a raging narcissist. So, like, the
Mm,
opposite side of narcissism is not humility, it's imposter syndrome. Like that's where you have
mm,
to realize you might be
mm,
trapped, and it's all in the spectrum of ego. So I invite you A to
mm,
see that those are actually opposing forces, and B to see then there is a beautiful balancing point in the middle, which is just
mm.
taking yourself out of it and realizing where the people you want
Yeah.
to help are on the journey, and then pulling from yourself to see, well, what stories, experiences, lessons do I have that can be guiding to them? Then everything becomes a little more simple with your personal branding. Content ideation. Now I don't have to
Yeah.
think about like what I'm going to say about myself today. That doesn't even cross your mind, but in the action of
Mhm.
serving others, your personal brand is cemented.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh my goodness. So When you are working with someone who's smart enough to get support on their personal branding and not try to figure it all out and wait until they're perfect, and you hear them tell their story, like, how do you know which nuggets are kind of the ones?
Yes, I would say anytime someone tells me their story and I look at it as like there is a distinct before and after in your life, and it doesn't need to be so, again, to use this term, climactic, that it was like,
Mhm.
once I was blind and now I see, and here I am, and, the
Yeah.
burning bush talked to me and all this stuff. No, it can be as simple as the before I figured out how much time meetings were draining me and the after of that.
Mhm.
Like any of those critical tipping points where you got a new lens,
Mhm.
got a new perspective, or a new season of your life started. There's you like look at the
Mhm.
seasonalities of your life. If you were to just map out your lifeline thus far, and I usually do this with people in a professional capacity, it's like, okay, tell me what
Mhm.
happened after you graduated college. It's inevitably the first job and the finding or lack of finding yourself in the first job. There's some like
Mhm. Mhm.
variations of this that all of you will probably find for yourself. So that's one. Okay, there's the learning of what you don't love in their first job, because very few of us find the first job and like,
Yeah.
this is it, amazing, I've landed, look at me, I'm now doing what I love for the rest of my life. So there's usually the unlearning process of the first job, or the leaning into who you are. Then there's whatever the second iteration of that is. For a lot of people I work with, that's usually they left and started their own business. But for a lot of people, it's discovering maybe a new vocation, a new employer, and insights that are gleaned from that. And then there's usually the maturation process. I had the beginner's perspective, and now I always ask people, well, now look back at this
Mhm.
season that we're talking about, and what are the five things you wish you could tell your younger self now, or tell people 10 years behind you? And so it becomes kind of like that. It's like find those chapters, and then as you find them, say what you wish you would have heard at the beginning of it. Now this really starts to flesh out your, and to bring it to you,
Mhm.
Darla, when you start to sense the things you would tell that younger person, you do start to identify what kind of magic is in
Mhm.
there. For some
Mhm.
people, it's the advice they'd give themselves looks very different to other people, because we all have different kind of magic, different kind of ways of
Mhm.
learning, different interpretation of things. I could look through my whole corporate schedule and attack it from a personal brand standpoint, sorry, my corporate life.
Yeah.
I could also look at my corporate life and attack it from a mindfulness standpoint. And I actually saw both. And so I think my personal brand is really kind of an intersectionality between personal branding and intentionality and spirituality and
Mhm.
mindfulness. And those are the two big themes, because I find all of the advice I would have given myself usually fell into one of those two buckets.
Uh-huh. I love that. Yeah, I can definitely see the parallels there. And I love that you recommend people make posts on that as well. Hot tip,
Yes.
LinkedIn post,
Yes.
advice to my younger self or advice
There's
to these types of people.
there is a woman that I know, Caitlin Kumi, spelled with a C, last name Kumi. Probably easier to search on the last name, because I forget how the rest. I'm a Caitlin too, and there's 16 different ways we spell our names. So
Right.
Caitlin Kumi, she works at Google, and and she's a LinkedIn top voice, recognized as such by LinkedIn editorial, which is like a very high ranking recognition. And every post, Darla, and I kid you not, every single one is advice to 20 somethings. And then she just gives her advice Monday
Mm,
through Friday.
mm,
She never veers from that prompt, advice to 20 somethings, and she has exploded.
wow.
And then she just always tells the advice she would give to them, and how that showed up for her. And like I'm talking about a meteoric rise, just like the
Mm,
story she's been through the opening lens of advice to 20 somethings.
I love that. So, hot tip for everyone listening.
Yes. And get super specific. Like if somebody said advice to 35-year-olds, that happens to be how old I am right now, I would read it, even if
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for advice, because I would think about it. You read it to see if you agree or you disagree, because you are the target demo.
Mhm.
So, like, the more specific you are with audience identification, And that goes back to knowing who you're
Mm,
serving and taking your ego out of it first and focusing on them, the quicker the traction.
yeah. You talked about light in the dark and the dark night of the soul. Have you had any? I know you have, but dark nights of the soul in the growing of your business. And
Oh
what's
God.
one that people could learn from?
Yes. The biggest one that comes to mind is at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, I saw market demand for done for you LinkedIn content.
Mm.
The hardest time to listen to your soul is when a lot of money is on the table.
Ooh.
One of the hardest times, I'll say that. Because money can be such an external power. It really has a
Mm.
silencing effect or a dimming effect on the volume of your own internal voice. I think it's one of the biggest
Mm.
mufflers to that.
Mm.
And so I literally had like contracts in hand, people who were like, just tell me what to pay you and I'm gonna pay you. And my operations director and I looked at each other and said, okay, it's here. This is a clear indication
Mm.
that
Mm.
that we should build an agency and we can do this and we're just going to deliver 12 or 20 posts a month depending and this will be the fee and la la.
Mm.
Fast forward 2 years from that point, I had hired 9 people. We had gotten to about 1 million in revenue
Mm.
in 24 months. And I was burnt out. I was financing the business, meaning I wasn't paying
Mhm.
myself. I was growing broke. I
Yeah.
was trying to grow myself out of a situation of my own making. And the situation of my own making was I never took the time to listen to the voice
Mhm.
outside of advisors and potential clients who said, this is such a good idea. That was internal to me, which was, but I still just wanted to grow an online business where I worked intimately with people and coach people and didn't do things for them.
Mm.
And I know what the look, there's a million different problems with the business model that I have, but I know the big stimming underlying issue was I never wanted to grow an agency.
Yeah.
And as soon as I admitted that to myself, then it was like that was the hardest thing to say out loud. Sometimes just the saying out loud of what you know in your soul is the hardest thing.
Yes.
And then, like, once I said it, Darla, I couldn't unsay it. My business partner and I looked at each other and we were like, we don't really want to do this. And then actually everything that became so hard in my mind started to become so clear. Having the conversations with clients, having the conversations with employees, figuring out how to spin off the business. I was building and building that into such a mountain in my mind and going around that spiral when just saying the truth made all of that like deflate and become clear. And then, so we did. We transitioned out our team. We put them with great strategic partners. I'm elated to say I still keep in touch with all of my employees. We thought
Mm.
about what they would need to be supported, which even though I couldn't afford it, I put my own funds into giving them 60 days of severance and transition.
Mm.
I just knew, like, again, I'm done listening to experts who told me,
Yeah.
you don't have the cash to do this, just let them go. I knew in my soul,
Mm.
like, now I'm going to listen to me, not you all. Like, I'm going to
Mm.
listen to me. I know on the other side of this, I can make the money to fill that hole, but I'm not letting them go without 60 days
Mm.
notice. I'm just not doing it. I'll put myself into some more debt and I will count on myself to make it out of it. And Darla, like 2 years later, having paid off that debt, having making more progress,
Mm.
profit in the business than I ever have, and still being in touch with those people and seeing them as good friends, I'm
Mhm.
so happy I took on the temporary discomfort of debt and listened to myself
Yeah.
and not those advisors because I'm sure I wouldn't have any of those relationships anymore.
Mm. That's
And
beautiful.
so I think that dark night was really like
Mm.
sometimes money screams very loudly. Sometimes experts who you pay good money to scream very loudly. And for good reason,
Yeah.
that's their job. But it doesn't matter if
Mhm.
you aren't aligned internally. And I'm sure if I was really called to build an agency and that was what I wanted to do, that model would have worked. But it
Yes.
was like building on top of a shit sandwich. Like I knew I wasn't there. So it didn't matter
Mm.
how great of advice I had or how much money was on the other line. It was like I was making it so that it wasn't working because I just wouldn't be honest enough and have enough
Yeah.
courage to say, I don't want to freaking do this.
That's such a great story. You said the people were asking for it, and then you looked at each other and said, "This is a clear indication we should build an agency."
Mhm.
And I hear stuff like that all the time, right? It's like, oh, it's a sign.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember the very first like webinar I did talking about, I think it was called Unleash Your Magic or something like that. And people in the chat were having all of this conversation about all the times they followed the signs
Yeah.
and it didn't work out. And it's like
Mm.
I mean, you know that I'm beyond passionate about this, how we don't know how to hear our own intuition. Like that's what our magic is. It's our inner knowing guiding us.
Mm.
And mostly we're so conditioned from, school as kids to do what the teacher wants that we don't even know how to hear what our soul wants. So
Yeah.
I don't blame you for looking at that and going, oh, it's a sign. I did an event, a whole thing. I lost a bunch of money on a big event because I followed what I thought was a sign, right? And I didn't know how to tune in and say, okay, source, make it really clear. Is this what you
Yeah.
mean by that? Right now I know how
Yeah.
to do that, but I didn't know that then. And most people don't. And whether it is something that leads people down a path that's not aligned, like your story, or people start to move towards something and something bad happens and they go, oh, that's a sign, right? And it's like, oh, we have a whole interesting relationship with that idea. So I love that story.
It's so true. I remember one of the biggest ahas I've had in my personal development journey was learning the distinction between committed versus attached. And I think that's really
Mhm.
served me too. Like, am I just attached is like there's a very specific way
Yeah.
this has to happen. It's usually external or something.
Yeah.
It has the machinations of a very specific thing, and then committed is intention versus like literal manifestation. And you know this better than I because it's not my area of expertise, but one of the critical questions I find myself asking these days when I'm undergoing something and I want to see if like is it intuition or a sign or whatever is,
Mhm.
am I in a place of commitment? I'm committed, something happens and here's why. Or am I in a place of attachment? It has to look like this.
Mhm.
People are having me feel like it has to look like this.
Yeah.
And if I'm too attached, it's like, okay, danger, captain, like,
Yes.
just probably don't make any critical decisions right now. You are in a place of heavy, heavy attachment. You are very married to specifically how this looks and not necessarily how this feels or,
Mhm.
all those other great versions of the magic we have, how it feels, how it's, what our internal voice is saying, all the process of that. So that's been helpful for me. Am I in this moment, am I committed versus attached? That's also been very helpful with clients. Am I attached to their approval or am I committed to getting them
Mm.
results? As a recovering people pleaser, that's a huge
Yeah.
one. Approval attachment.
Oh, that's so good because the other part I underlined from what you said is, just saying the truth out loud and the energy, like then
Yeah.
there's space. And
Hmm.
so, first admitting to yourself that you don't want to do this is a truth. And with clients, like being able to say the truth, whether they like you or not, or right, is also helps that energy dissipate. And, we
Yeah.
train coaches, as you know, and a lot of times people are so trying to get the result for their client to the point that they're skipping over all of the shit their client's doing to sabotage themselves.
It's so
Yeah.
true. How much energy do we burn trying to not say the truth
Yeah.
versus like the temporary discomfort of saying the truth or perceived discomfort, but
Yeah.
then everything else is available on the other side of it. And I think that's another big thing I just look at in life at large that I would go
Mm.
back and tell my 15-year-old self is like, oh my God, Kate, you spend so much time dancing around the truth. Like there's just such a
Mm.
straightforward path through this mountain, like, but you're choosing to do all the summits instead of just going through the tunnel
Mm.
that's right there. Like, just say the truth of the matter. Look at
Oh,
all of this wasted energy dancing around it. I
I got to say, my 15-year-old wouldn't even have comprehended that.
No, no,
Just
no,
saying.
no, 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 no. The things that I was going through at 15 have been like, yeah, right, whatever.
Okay. I thought maybe you were much wiser than me.
No, no, no. I wish, okay, so the thing I wish I could tell my 15-year-old self that my 15-year-old self would receive is that. But yeah, probably a better learning lesson for my 23-year-old self. I think that
Right.
Kate would have maybe started to getting to like get what I was saying there.
Love it. Okay, so the personal brand paradigm shift, or sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. The name of our gift here, magnetic message formula mini course. Can
Yes.
you talk about that?
Yes. So, as Darla and I were saying, there are key components of every personal brand. And sometimes it's hard to identify those in ourselves. And so, what the magnetic message formula is like a very metaphorical scalpel to you.
Mm,
Like it is laser sharp and precise. And by watching this, you'll understand how to parse out the magic that is you in a way that's easy to or easier to scale. And when I
mm,
say
mm,
scale, I don't mean one to many online, which is, I think a goal of all of ours is like, how do I be me for many
yeah.
people online? And then I can grow my brand and business that way. The way that this course sets it up is to pull out the parts of you that create one to one at scale. There's a difference
Mm,
between one to
mm,
many and creating a relationship with an audience that feels like, my God, she totally gets me. And I can see
mm,
myself in her. And I feel that way too. And then just creating that
mm,
intimacy at scale. I never like to teach people how to build a large following. I like to teach them how to create intimacy and truth at scale.
mm,
And so the magnetic message
mm,
formula is really designed to do that, not to, hit on flashy things or hot button topics or anything like that. It's really how do you take that magic that is you, organize it. Again, there's probably the recognition
mm,
pattern. I'm really
yeah.
recognizing recognition magic is probably my thing here. And then how do I duplicate that over and over again in a way that feels natural and not forced and comes off as
Mm.
incredibly intimate to my audience.
That's such a beautiful phrase, intimacy and truth at scale. So good.
Yeah. And I
Okay,
think
so
like a lot of people, sorry, just my last thing, because I feel like your audience will so get this. A lot of people, another misconception and paradigm shift of personal branding is the bigger you get, the more detached you get. And
mm,
there's almost like this built-in block, but there is a way to do it where you never lose that. And the best
yeah.
influencers or personal brands in the world, they manage to maintain that intimacy just at different levels of scale.
Mm. Fun fact, my coach that I worked with through my divorce, Daniel, is who introduced us.
Love Daniel.
And one of the big takeaways, kind of at the end of our work was I built my whole business on intimacy, Kate. And then going through my divorce, I kind of created a bit of distance with it. And for my own healing, my own protection, I had coaches delivering a lot of things.
Mm.
And for a while, Daniel just kept saying, sourced is you, but it's
Mm.
you, but it's you. and
Hmm.
and he kept pointing out this like way in which I was just, I it's funny because right now I'm practicing leaning back and still being really intimate, right? Like having it be lighter. But he pointed out this place where I had been through a season of less intimacy for my own, healing, which I
Mm.
can't say I regret. And Source supported me through all of it to where I
Hmm.
didn't lose anything throughout the entire experience. But I'm very much in a place of
Mm.
leaning in terms of my intimacy, my heart, leaning back in terms of my micromanaging and
There it
controlling
is.
everything, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
It's a dance, isn't it? It's such a
Yeah.
beautiful dance. Again, part of that messy 90%, but
Mm,
one that all of us can relate to.
yeah. So, intimacy and truth at scale. Go get the magnetic message formula. Go pick up your scalpel and let us know how it goes. Let Kate know you heard her here. Let me know if the formula was useful for you. And Kate, any parting words?
In terms of personal branding, this is so cliche, but I have to use it. It's like first best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The second best time is now. Don't think you're too late. Don't think you missed any window. It's never too late, and the world is always ready to receive your truth at scale. And I see this again and again and again in personal branding. People think, I missed the wave of TikTok, or I missed the wave of Instagram, or I missed the wave of
Mm,
LinkedIn. No, you haven't. I've seen people
right.
build these followings very quickly overnight, and whether they realize it or not, it's because A, they just got out there and started, and B, they are telling their truth in a way that's clearly resonant with people. So time
Yeah.
is always on your side. You can always begin again, and you can start today, and you'll do well. And I really, I not only believe it, I've seen it prove itself out over and over and over again.
Thank you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for your contribution to me. And good luck with that baby.
Thank you, Darla. Thanks, everyone.